My name is Victor Fuhrman. Some call me the Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. Is there a connection between UFOs and faith? Is it possible that extraterrestrial beings are the angelic messengers described in the Bible and in the liturgy of many different faiths? My guest this week on Destination Unlimited, Chris Bledsoe, had a life-changing contact experience that led to both a miraculous healing and the understanding that there is a connection between ETs, UFOs, and the divine. Chris is a UFO experiencer and contactee. His life, now that his children are grown, is centered around telling his story and understanding why his experiences with the phenomenon are increasing and evolving. He is passionate about keeping an open mind and engaging those who question who we are and why we are here. He is driven on the same trek as many others, asking the age-old question, are we alone? Chris lives in North Carolina with his wife, Yvonne, and their 2 dogs. He joins me this week to share his amazing and inspiring story and groundbreaking book, UFO of God, the extraordinary true story of Chris Bledsoe. Please join me in welcoming to Destination Unlimited, Christopher Bledsoe. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here, Victor. I appreciate it.
And it's our honor to have you join and speak to our audience and share your experience and your message, which I believe is so important. So, Chris, please share with us your early life, your spiritual foundation, and your thoughts on ETs and UFOs and contact phenomenon before what happened in 2007.
Well, I'm 61 years old. I live in the same county I was raised in. I was actually born one county over in a little county called Robinson, North Carolina, eastern North Carolina. And but I basically live where I was raised, so I have deep roots here. And growing up, I grew up in the country, out in a small mobile home next to my grandfather, who was a farmer and a landscaper. He did both, but I come up with very little, having to work. And my earliest memories, of course, now I never thought about this much until I got older, but my earliest memories is sitting on the ground. I never knew why I was obsessed with the moon. All this is in the book. And how injuries started happening to me as a little fella. And I never knew why. My mother shielded me, thought I was so accident prone that just things happened, unnaturally. I was shot in the back, point blank, at 10 years old from 6 foot away with a shotgun.
Oh.
And it hit me right in the left shoulder, straight in the shoulder blade. And for some miraculous reason, I was saved. That 350 pieces of lead entered my body, but not a one touched my heart or my spine, although they were very close. And I still have all that lead in my chest. When I go through the airport, I set off these machines. So they pat me down. But it was a lot of trauma, Victor, growing up. And I always crying out to after it would happen. I had a new car, a brand new car that blew up when I was 18 years old. It had a couple thousand miles on it and run hot. When I opened the hood, it exploded on me. The radiator did. Put me in the hospital. So it was always these freak accidents happening. And I never understood why. But fast forward to 2007, I had just come through a near-death experience again. I had a doctor, this is in the book, had a brand new doctor I was referred to by my personal private doctor. And he ended up um, causing me to go into toxic poisoning. I was poisoned by his carelessness. He actually overdosed and died on medication.
Mm.
Nobody knew he was taking pills, the doctor, until it was too late. He'd put 113 patients in the hospital, and I was one of those. So here again, I'm on my knees crying out to God in 2007, why me? Why, uh, did this happen? I
And
had Crohn's disease really bad, and they were trying to treat me with what they called Paxil, a new antidepressant, because stress and Crohn's doesn't go along together. The
and
worse the Crohn's gets, the worse your depression gets.
and what had precipitated all of this? You had a difficult experience a few years before that.
Yeah, what happened was in 2001, I was building at the pinnacle of my building career. We were in business, my wife and I, for almost 20 years, and 911 happened. And boy, was I caught barefooted, I guess you would say. The market here in Fayetteville is Fort Bragg, a military VA market. And when the World Trade Center thing happened, it basically locked our military base down, which stopped the sale of houses. It just sent shockwaves, right? And by 2008, the whole country uh, went busted, basically. We had this great recession. And so I watched my business dissolve. The interest was so expensive, 30, 40,000 a month just going out just to pay interest. No sales. So I watched a train wreck, a slow motion train wreck, deplete everything I had. And we sold apartments and houses to pay bills, and I was left with nothing. So in early 2007, I'm just coming through a near death and losing everything I had. So that's where I was at that point in my life.
And
16 years.
how did that challenge your faith?
Well, it caused me to cry out because of, growing up. My mother, I really never. I wanted to go to church, not because of my mother and father, but because that's what I wanted to do when I was little. My neighbors went, and so I kind of went on my own and developed a relationship with a little bit of faith. They teach you that when you're young. And so I went back to that when I had nothing left. I couldn't feed my children. They were all 9 to 17, 4 children, a little girl and 3 boys. And I'm 46 or so at that time, and unable to work because I'm sick with this Crohn's disease, and lost everything. And so I went back to crying out to God. That's the only thing I figured I had left. And so that's what started that whole event on June 8th, January 8th of '07.
And tell us what happened that day.
Well, I hadn't worked much in 3 years because I wasn't able to. I was just so sick. And I was lost my home. I'd moved next door to my mom and dad, my wife and our children. And my dad every day would come over or call me and, son, you got to get out and try to work. So he was in the building business as well. So he found me a job to manage, and I took on this job, and it took 4 months to do it. And the boys that were actually the workers that were building this house, it was $1.5 million beach house, an hour and a half away. So they'd been gone for 4 months, and I would go back and forth to check on them and stay a couple days a week in a beach house that we had rented. But it was the end of the job. We started in October of 2006. By late December, just before Christmas, we had a little left to get paid. And so it was the first week of January, just after New Year's, when the guys went back down and finished the job and called me and said, "We got your check. We're coming to Fayetteville. We'll drop it by." And of course, they wanted to get paid. And they asked me, "Can we go fishing and celebrate? We don't have to go out of town anymore." So I said, "Yeah." So they came back after cashing their checks, and I picked them up with my truck, the only four-wheel drive pickup. And where we were going was across the 200-yard field to the backside where the woods start, and then you drive a quarter mile down in this forest down to the river bottom. So you lose 100 foot or more of elevation. And so at 2:30 on that day, we arrived there, and they had their fishing poles. Of course, I didn't fish. I didn't care to fish, and my son, I never let him know what I was thinking, nor my family, but I was struggling real bad. I got them organized, got them fishing. That's what I do, is organize people in that business. And I walked away about 3:30 or 4, after about an hour of them getting their poles in the water. I walked off to meditate in the forest, down in the forest. It's like at the end of the cul-de-sac. You just go right on down in the woods. And just before dark, it got dark in the woods a little earlier than it does out in out in the open. So I came out of the forest about 4:45, somewhere in there. And I asked them if they wanted to fish anymore or they were ready to go home. And they were like, "We just got here, boss. Let's fish some more." I said, "Okay, let's get a fire going because it's dark soon. It's going to get cold." So we got this fire going. Everybody stopped fishing and walked around this 1 acre grassy area, this cul-de-sac, picked up sticks and had a big pile of wood there and a fire next to it. And they were sitting with their back to the fire and their feet right at the edge of the river. And I said, "Well, look, it's 10 after 5. I'm going to walk up to the field the way we came in and spend a little while there and watch the sun go down and see if any wildlife comes out." Still not telling them how depressed and where I was. I just didn't let it out. But that was my reason for going up there. So as I'm leaving them, heading my way back to the west, up to the field, I had to go uphill a long ways. I heard something walking in the forest next to me, and it sounded like a deer. And I stopped, and it stopped. And the reason I'm telling you this ties into my son's experience. So it kind of unnerved me for a while because it kept walking. When I'd walk, it walked. When I'd stop, it stopped. And it did that 3 or 4 times in just a quarter mile walk to the hill. Finally, the road goes down parallel with the river 1/8 of a mile and then turns west. And the sun was coming down that pathway, which the other part of it was overhung by trees. It was like a tunnel, and it was kind of dark in there, and got it had me nervous. And I don't normally get that way because I didn't understand why it would stop, and it sounded like 2 feet. Well, I made the curve and started west, and as I got near the top of the hill, about 20, 25 feet short of the gate, there's a gate at the top. I still couldn't see the field. I could only look up at an angle and see the sky. But as I got a little closer up towards the top where you could see the trees on the far side of the field, there was what I thought was the sun, late in the evening setting, where you can look at it and it doesn't hurt your eyes. So I'm looking down at the ground, walking another step, trying to keep my feet out of a mud hole, and take a couple more steps. And I looked up, and it was getting bigger. You could see more of it from half of it now. It started to look really close and bizarre. I took a few more steps up, and now my peripheral view, my the road opens up wider as I get near the top, and I noticed there were two of these. And immediately, shock and fear set in because I initially thought it was the sun, and then realized real quick it wasn't the sun. It was about 300 yards away. It was just above the trees on the far side of the field, and probably 50 foot across. Big blazing orange balls of fire, two of them. And so I hid myself with the hill in front of me, trying I was so curious, I wanted to see it, but I was afraid of it. So I would duck down and get on my knees, and I raise my head up using the hill to shield me, thinking I was hiding, right? Well, after a little bit of time, a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes, I'd had all I could stand, and I was worried about my son and these guys down there fishing and what I'm seeing. I knew I'm a commercial rated pilot, and I knew it wasn't anything from, our arsenal or anything that we had. And so I decided to run. And so I made a plan. All in a second or two, I'm going to run, but when I do, I'm going to look back. I got to look back one more time. So I'm down on my knees hiding, right? So I made the motion to move, to run. I turned my body downhill. I stood up and looked over my shoulder back at these two balls of fire, two setting suns. That's what they look like. And suddenly a third one up above me and out front, where I could see those two and it as well, appeared out of nowhere and shot down beside the second two. Well, at that moment, Victor, I can't tell you how much a shock it was, because I knew at that point they knew I was there, and there wasn't no hiding from them. It was a realization that this phenomenon, this powerful force of fire, has seen me. And so the next thing I remember is the last 50 yards to the fire. I don't remember anything of the trip down the hill. I just remember the last 50 yards. And when I got to the fire, my son wasn't there. It was just these three grown men standing there by the fire. They weren't fishing anymore. I come trotting out of the darkness, didn't have a flashlight, right up to the fire. It had burned down to just barely nothing. They were standing there looking at the ground. When they saw me, I'm like, hey guys, you won't believe what I just saw up at the hill. And they're like, where have you been? And I'm like, oh, what do you mean? I was just up at the field. I hadn't been gone 20 minutes. They're like, no, you've been gone all night. We've been looking you. And they began to show me the truck. It had been moved. They had one of the guys stayed at the fire while the other two would ride my truck up and down the highway looking for me. So Chris Jr. wasn't there. And I said, where is he? Where's Junior? What's happened with him? And they said, well, we don't know. We lost him 2 hours ago. He went back in the forest in the back of the cul-de-sac where you'd gone earlier on foot looking for you. So I panicked. And I left right away from the fire, and I ran to the back of the cul-de-sac. Remember, it's just an acre, so it's not all that big. A couple 100 feet in either direction, kind of circular. So I ran in the very back part shouting for him, and he wouldn't answer. So I started making my way in this thick forest, and I knew once I got in there it would open up, but around the edge it's real thick. So I'm parting the bushes, trying to keep from getting poked in the eye, and I'm shouting for him. And I heard him. I heard him on the ground. I walked right up on him. He was getting up. And he started crying. And he's like, Daddy, where you been? I said, what do you mean, where have I been? I was just up at the field. No, Daddy, you've been gone all night. And so confusion set in on my part. He's crying, and he's telling me about these two creatures that paralyzed him, and he couldn't move. And I'm like, I was really afraid to say anything to him about what happened to me, because he was in such shock. I mean, he was really in shock, shaking. And so he began to tell me about these two red balls of light that he could see all the way down that eighth of a mile, plus the 200 feet of cul-de-sac, the way I'd walked out. So the noise I heard walking undoubtedly were these two beings. And they had these red glowing eyes, so they looked like a ball of light. You know, you could see with their eyes at that distance. And they started towards him, and the fire was between he and them, so he couldn't get up and go towards them where they would see him. So he began to hide under the bushes just from these two balls of light. And when they got within, they were about 3 feet off the ground, coming way down the road. When they got within 15, 20 feet of him, he could see there were these two translucent figures, 3 to 4 feet tall, with these red glowing eyes. And one was always looking at him, and he couldn't move, he couldn't yell, and he was paralyzed there on the ground with these two figures around him for the longest time. He was gone 2 hours in total, and that was the beginning of it. And so I took him back to the fire pretty quickly. Time to go home. We knew that he was begging to go home. And when I walked him up to the fire, these three guys were freaked out because I'd been gone and they didn't know what was happening. And Junior's talking about creatures and these red balls of light. And one of the guys had seen a red orb, and it really freaked him out when he acknowledged it. It just kind of crossed the path really quick. But suddenly one of the men said, "Look," and we all raised up our heads to a clear sky, standing on the riverbank of the Cape Fear River. And what looked like the brightest star in the sky, Venus, was, you know how shiny and bright it is, or Jupiter. It looked like 8 or 9 of these stars just lit up in different areas and flew to a point in the sky above us and made a circle. There was a whole bunch of them. They were doing these maneuvers where they came together and they went away from each other. They came back and circled around, made a big circle, and then 3 of them landed, came all the way down from way up there and landed across the river in front of us. And that set in pandemonium, and fear gripped us all. It did them more than it did me. I wasn't really afraid anymore. Whatever they did to me that night took the fear away. But they were terrified, and so we left out of there. And by the time we got to the gate at the top of the hill, we left fishing poles and all on the water, never picked them up. And when we got up to the top of the hill where I was taken, they were still there. The same two setting suns were still in the same spot. And the third one that got me was now on the ground in the road in front of us, blocking our path to the highway in the middle of the field, this big cornfield. And it's just sitting there crossways of the road about 5 feet off the ground. Looks like a football, and it's glowing white instead of orange anymore. And so finally, after we heard 3 gunshots. This orb, or this ball of light, a football shaped light, turns towards us, comes right over my truck. I could have shot it with a slingshot out of the sunroof. And it was totally silent, and it just took off, and away we went towards the house that night. But that was the beginning of it all, and it's never stopped.
My guest is Christopher Bledsoe. His book is called UFO of God, The Extraordinary True Story of Chris Bledsoe. Chris, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you.
Well, you can go to my website, ufoofgod.com, and there is a link to Amazon. You can go straight to Amazon and buy it. But on my website, there is testimonials and a lot of stuff you can, and my social media accounts, links to those that you can feel free to follow me. And on my Instagram, I post a few videos of the phenomena that I take pretty regular.
And we'll be back with more of Chris after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, OMTimes Radio, IOM FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week, Christopher Bledsoe. We're talking about his book, UFO of God, the extraordinary true story of Chris Bledsoe. Chris, continue with what you were sharing in the first segment. So you guys got back in the vehicle, the orb took off, and you started heading back home.
Yeah, so we headed home, and there became a fight in the vehicle about who was going to get home first. I mean, it was literally terror so bad within my vehicle, a fear of an invasion, that we'd never see our family again. They were literally debating who gets to go home to their family first, if it'll be the last time we saw them. But words just can't describe how panic and much terror they were all experiencing. So we flew out of the place once this orb left. Still, these two red ones are above the trees. Never left. And we left them. Left three on the river, landed on the riverbank, 75 yards from us. And now we left two up at the highway. So all this excitement, we're heading home. I talk about this in the book without giving the story away. There's a halfway to these three guys lived, two of them side by side, and one about 4 miles past. So we had to take him home first, 4 miles past, because he was the biggest guy and he won the argument. So we brought the other two back, come 4 miles back, and dropped them off. But on that way, that journey during that fight, there's a dead man's curve, a power line that crosses, a high tension power line that crosses right over this dead man curve. And it was really a 35-mile-an-hour curve where a tragic accident happened there to me many years earlier. And it was at that moment that when we went through that curve, there was this huge object hovering right over top of that very spot. And that was the first time that I got some peace in my life since I had been 20 years old over this accident that happened there. And it was an amazing thing. All this plays into this experience. So we get everybody dropped off. Chris Jr. and I head home. And he didn't want to go back under that power line because of that big object hovering there. So we went the long way home, got to the house, and he's panicked. He's running to every room and turning the lights on inside the rooms, closing the windows and blinds and locking the door. Even the bathroom with no window, he turned the light on and locked the door. All the outside lights were on. I'm in my study trying to find on TV about an alien invasion. We had no clue. I mean, I just literally thought it was a world thing, like War of the Worlds. Nothing on TV. It just didn't seem right. And Chris Jr., after a few minutes of battening down the whole house, he's still in shock. He comes in the room and just like anything on TV. I said, no, son, nothing. And suddenly, living out in the country next door to my dad, he lived on 6 acres and he has a wooded area behind his house, half the land basically. And in that wooded area, he had a big dog kennels, a big one, where he raised hunting dogs all his life. And he had 15 there that night and usually about 30. So suddenly we hear this noise go right over the house. And I thought it was a helicopter heading toward the river because we were only 2 miles by air from the river and it was going that direction. So I thought, Fort Bragg's found it. They picked up on it and they're heading down there. But instead, suddenly the dogs started going crazy in that kennel. And I mean, being raised like I was shot at 10. I was hunting at 5 and killed my first deer at 5 years old, which I'm not proud of. I don't do that anymore. I completely quit hunting. I don't even hurt bugs. But I was raised knowing that dogs make different sounds. They sound if they're afraid, that sound. If they're curious, or if it's an animal, and you know what they sound like when it comes to every type of thing. And I actually thought that somebody was in the yard breaking into my dad's garage because the garage was right near the dog kennel. So in my thoughts, I was thinking that they could see this at the garage, see somebody breaking in. And I had a lot of stuff there because I moved from a big house and I moved half of our belongings into that garage. So I'm like, Christopher, somebody's breaking in Dad's shop. We need to go out and see if we can see who it is and use the dark to hide us. We won't take a flashlight. And he's like, no, Daddy, no, don't open that door. Don't go outside. Please, Daddy, don't do this. And I'm like, son, I walked to the back door, full glass door, and out back is my Chesapeake Bay Retriever. She's 110 pounds. Hair just bristled up. She was barking every breath in the direction of the dog kennel. I said, we'll use her to ward off anybody. I mean, I'm not worried about somebody. Will be hidden in the dark, and she will keep us safe. And so finally, I opened the door, and against his wish, he grabbed me by the back of the shirt, and we walked out the door. And Rosie took off, ran out about 40 feet, and stopped and looked back at me. And I said, "Get him, girl." So she took off in that direction toward the dog kennel. And so did he and I. We had about 100 yards to walk through the woods to get there. When we got there, I noticed that all the dogs were facing to the rear of the kennel, barking every breath. And it was a scary bark, like they were afraid of what they were barking at. I mean, really scary sound. And all 15 of them were making that loud sound. And I mean, you can hear a hound dog from a mile away. They have a loud mouth. And so Christopher and I were standing there in the dark next to Rosie, 4 or 5 feet from her. She's pointing into the forest, growling, snarling, her hair standing up like the rest of them. I said, Junior, I'm going to send her in, and you and I run back out to our property, which we had a clearing. I had grass cut all the way to the back on my side. So she would push out anything in our direction, we'd see it. So we made an agreement, and I bumped her on the rear and said, get him. She jumped right in the woods, took off, every breath barking. So he and I ran back toward our property. And when I made a left to go to the back to cut off this dog, this is hunting terms. I grew up hunting, so I know how to stay in front of the dog. Christopher had all he could stand, and he turned loose, and he peeled to the right and went to the house. But I didn't know that. I thought I'd slipped on the grass and pulled away from him. But anyhow, I ran all the way to the back of the property, hard as I could, trying to get in front of this dog. And I ran up against a great big oak tree, full run, stopped myself. And the dog's coming. It's not very far in the woods, just coming towards me. And when I stopped myself against a tree, I'm trying to not breathe very loud. I'm trying to get my breath. I'm panting, but not make any noise in case a bear, I didn't know if it was a bear or a human or whatever was in there. I kind of ruled out a human because they wasn't looking toward the garage. They were looking in the back. And as soon as I stopped, I turned backwards to look to see if Junior was coming. I still think he's coming. And when I did, there stood just arm's length, maybe 4 feet from me, at the worst 4 feet. It's this little 3.5 foot tall, glassy glowing being that had red glowing eyes, and the body looked like it had glass on the outside, and it was glowing the color of the moon. And I immediately surrendered. I thought I was going to die. I thought it had me. And I just said, when I'm looking back now, my hands are against the oak tree. So I got closer to the tree and turned myself to face it. And I said, I surrender. I mean you no harm. And I heard this loud voice. It was telepathic, but it rumbled in my head. And it's like, you don't understand. We're not here to help you or hurt you. We're here to help you. And so the dog comes on through, and this thing disappears right there, all within seconds after it spoke to me. And so I made my way back to the house and told Chris Jr. very little about it because I didn't want to frighten him. He was already in panic enough. But the next day, Victor, I woke up about 10 o'clock. I was panicked because I hadn't taken my medication. I'd been taking medication for years and years for this Crohn's disease. And it was one of those, if you didn't take it, you would suffer for 2 or 3 days over each pill you missed. It would prolong symptoms. But I didn't have any symptoms. And to this day, I have never had another symptom of that I suffered with 17 and a half years.
You experienced a miraculous healing.
Yes. So that was why I knew from the beginning when I reported it to the authorities, I told them that I believed they were angels. I was praying and it came and it took care of my disease. But that's when things got really rough because of the MUFON world. They didn't want to hear that. They're like, angels is just too much for us.
And you go into this in detail in a fascinating read that just keeps readers gripped to the book. So I'm not going to ask you to share any more about that, but I'd like to talk about some ancillary things that have happened. Are you still having experiences?
Yes, and I can't tell you how words can't describe how much is going on now over. It's greater than ever. It started. It never stopped. When that happened that night, the paranormal thing started in the house around my wife and children, and we had these balls of light in the house. We still have them. We had 4 in the house in the last month. But every night of my life, I began filming them way up in the air. And now they come out of the air and come down around me. And I've had 40 videos in the last week of orbs, some of them right next to me, ground level. And it's not like I have to go far to ask. I walk out. Sometimes they'll greet me when I come out the door.
Are the biblical descriptions of angels related to these beings?
I think 100%. Yes, sir. It's totally spiritual. And to this day, they come when I pray. I don't do any rituals or summoning or no CE5 or whatever all that means. It's just humble yourself. You know, I was touched by something. This ball of fire, these chariots of fire I read about in the Bible, they came and they helped me, and they've helped a number of other people as well. And that's in the book about, you know, some of the highest level families in our country in Washington, D.C. experience miraculous healings and stuff. So.
And I myself had one in 1975 when I was stationed in Korea. I'm not going to go into details because this is your interview, but I can totally identify with the experience that you had in terms of asking for help and receiving help from a source that's greater than we understand. So thank you for sharing that story. Tell us about your connection, your connecting UFOs and Christianity.
Well, you know, I married a Pentecostal holiness girl, and she's been the best thing that ever happened to me. We've been married 40 years this June. But 16 years ago, when I come home telling this, it really got me in bad trouble with the church, so they ostracized me. My wife still goes, and I'll probably go on Easter, but the rest of the time I don't. But it never stopped my. Uh, I got stronger in my faith than ever. I, and I know from my raising that it's about God. Now, is it about one particular religion? I don't want to say that because I think God's about everyone and every religion. I think it's time for man to stop fighting over who has the best skivvy on God when we can't imagine God to start with, right? You just can't. Is it Allah? Is it Jehovah? Is it whatever? It's all the same. It's about a force that created this place and all of us, I believe. But, I'm learning. I don't know, Victor, but I know it's spiritual and I know it's about God and I know believe it's the same thing that they talked about 2,000 years ago.
And the biblical word angel, the translation, actually means a messenger. Do you see these beings as messengers?
Yes, 100%. So, yes, sir.
And what type of messages have they shared with you?
Well, some of all kinds, and some negative visions that I don't like to talk about. Is disasters, but more so the thing that I'm seeing is that they want us to wake up. They want us to know the real, and they're going to do it, and it's going to happen whether we stop it or not. I think that the truth about God or our creation has a whole new meaning, that we've been into evolution all these years, and they teach that. But I think it's time to look at something mighty different, that there is a power that created everything.
To which I say, amen. My guest is Christopher Bledsoe. His book is called UFO of God, The Extraordinary True Story of Chris Bledsoe. We'll be back with more of Chris after these words on the OMTimes radio network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week is Christopher Bledsoe. His book, UFO of God. Chris, what inspired you, what called you to share your story at conferences and in your book, UFO of God?
Well, what inspired me to write the book, I've always been inspired to tell the story. From the very first day I was taken in 2007, I had this ultimate overarching knowledge somehow they imparted on me to tell what you know. It was never tell a certain thing. It was just tell what you know. And so I have made myself, no matter how much people laugh or ostracize or whatever, 16 years ago, I started telling it. And it was a lot tougher then to tell it than it is now. The world has changed. But writing my book, I have a very good friend. His name is David Broadwell. I was introduced to him by another good friend, Dr. John Alexander. And David reached out to me and it was in October of 2021, I think, is when he reached out to me. And he came here. He came from Washington, D.C., works with the government. But he came here to talk about an experience he had, and he was looking answers. And while he was here, we were sitting in my house, and I told him that the phenomenon was outside at that very moment. It was hovering over our house. And he jumped up out of the chair and opened the front door, and sure enough, there was a huge orb hovering right over our house. And then here come two more, always three. And he pulled out his cell phone and filmed it. And he looked at me, and his eyes were great big. And he said, "My gosh." He said, "John Alexander told me you knew when it was near. How did you know that?" I said, "Well, I heard them, David. They speak to me. This telepathic thing." Well, it got away with him so great that we started talking every night, and we become very close friends. And it was through his encouragement, "Chris, you got to write a book. You got to tell the story. It's very important you tell the world about what's happening with you." And so he worked on me from there until April. And get this, Victor, in April, he finally convinced me on paper. He wrote this thing up saying, "You need to write a book. You need to do it. And here's how you go about doing it. And I'll help you get it done." This is what he told me. So it was Good Friday of 2022 now, and Easter, the day before Easter. I walk out my little shop here outside that night, and I look up at the heaven, and I said, "You told me you would guide me and help me. And I knew they would answer me in one way or the other. If they didn't show, then it was not meant to be. If they did show, then I'm going to write this book, right?" And so the moment I said it, this orb appears over my pond. We live on 15 acres with a 4-acre pond, and the house is right on the water there. It's private, and this orb's hovering over my pond up above the tree. So I turned my little night vision camera towards it, and it's a monocular. So you look through it with one eye. So I usually have the other eye open to see if anything else is flying around. And so while I'm filming this orb, I see something way up in the sky, way up there. It started glowing orange, and here it's coming straight down. And it gets closer and closer, and suddenly I see this big set of wings just reach out and start flapping. And it's glowing reddish orange as it's descending down from up there where you'd see stars. And it flies all the way down. It's as big as a Citation jet or one of the older 737s. That's how big it looked. And it came right over my head flying, flapping these huge wings, glowing orange, and then it turns to glowing white and turns 90 degrees south and flew out of sight. And I filmed it the whole time. So I looked up and I said, "I guess that's a big yes." So I called my friend. I said, "You won't believe what I just filmed. But I think we're going to write a book, David." And so that's when we made the decision. And I put it on paper. I put a whole lot of words on paper, about 140,000 in total. But our book was limited to 90,000 or less. That's the size we had planned for. And with the help of my friend and a lot of others, we got it published in February of this year. And it is really taken off in a big way. I'm just so proud of it.
Congratulations. That's a wonderful share also in the way that your inspiration, you truly were inspired, and that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. There's been a recent wave in the last couple of years of sightings, and especially the last few months, a number of sightings. Do you have any idea as to why this is happening at this time?
Absolutely do. Because in 2019, I had gone silent from 2012 to 2019 for two reasons. I was working with the U.S. government on things that I just didn't go public about. You learn more if you're quiet. And so working with scientists and academics over that long period, sharing the phenomenon with them, they come here and they see it, or I go to them and they see it and study it. Was silent for all these years. I developed rheumatoid arthritis really bad, and I was almost full-time in a wheelchair. I was on a cane big time, and it gotten to the point where I could hardly walk. And so my wife would push me around in a wheelchair, and I was worried that's where it was going to end. But on Easter of 2019, I walked out of my house, hobbled out the back door to the pond. The back porch is just 6 foot from the water. Right? So when I open the door, I'm right at the water. And the minute I did, at Easter of 2019, this orb appears up a couple of 300 feet up in the sky, flashing erratically like it saw me. It does this often. And here it comes spiraling out of the sky and hovers over the bank on the other side. It came down through the pine trees and stopped on the other side of the pond. And it's bouncing up and down 10 feet, flashing red, yellow, white, wildly flashing. And so I'm really, it happened all in a second or two. So I dropped straight to my knees and I said to it, I'm not afraid. You come, but please don't get too close, because I've been warned that their plasma radiation can cause rheumatoid. I've heard all kinds of things. It can harm the body. NASA warned me of that. Even though they don't mean to hurt you, their energy can harm you. That's what they're telling me. And so I'm thinking that as I'm praying that, this orb starts towards me. And it gets 25 feet from me and it stops. Now, I have my cell phone out and I found it fumbling through the video. And I found video and I'm pointing it at this orb thinking I'm filming it. And it was over 5 minutes later, I looked up to see if I'm still recording, and I'd never hit record. So the very second I did, when I hit that button, this thing knew my thoughts and it knew what I was going to do before I did it. And immediately it went out. Now it's sitting there 25 feet, jumping up and down, flashing. And the second I hit record, it went out. And then now I'm recording, right? So for the next 17 and a half minutes, I recorded this orb 25 feet from me. It would appear and disappear, flashing at me. So the being was still there. It never left and was there for a whole half an hour. And I found myself to where I could my energy felt so zapped. And having rheumatoid and on chemo, I was really zapped. So I dragged myself up off my knees after it left. And you would think I'd want to tell the world and go look at the video right away. Well, I walked in and collapsed on the bed. But the next morning I got up, all this rush of information hit my head, and it was like, oh my Lord, panic. This thing told me, it said trouble is on the way. To tell the people to lock their doors and store up for a while because there's going to be trouble. And it said that. And that was early 2019. Well, undoubtedly, it was all about COVID because I told it in 10 podcasts, or at least several of the 10 I warned about this, what this thing told me. And it also said, we're going to reveal ourselves to humanity, and there ain't no stopping it. And we're going to let you help us do it with camera and with witness. Well, let me tell you something. Immediately, cameras started coming. I got 2 night vision cameras were sent to me. I didn't ask anybody for anything. They just started coming. I got a new $1,500 drone being sent to me this week. People wanting to just give stuff away, wanting to see if I can get closer to it and film it with a drone. Even though I told them, don't do that. These people still... And it all happened after that. Well, it said we're going to reveal ourselves. And we're going to reveal to bigger crowds around the world. And we're going to reveal it bigger with you. We're going to let you film us. Well, right away, these cameras come. And I started getting videos at the rate of 10, 15, 20 a day. And to this week, I've got 2,000 videos on my phone taken since the fall of since the spring of 2022, over 2,000, and it's climbing. And I don't even film half of what I see. But right after the new year, COVID hit, and that I didn't know it was COVID, but I knew it was trouble, and I warned for it. But the meat of the story is the phenomenon is going to reveal itself, and there's no turning back.
And may their message be an echoing of a basic tenet found in every major faith. Love thy neighbor as thyself, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That, if we all lived that way, what a world we would have.
That's absolutely beautiful, Victor. I love that.
My guest is Christopher Bledsoe. His book, UFO of God. Chris, one more time, please tell our listeners where they can find your book and more about your amazing story.
Well, you can get it off Amazon, the book title or my name. But I also have a website, UFOofGod.com. And there you can find my social media where I have videos posted on Instagram and our Facebook. And there are a lot of testimonials on the website from military and government officials and people that have witnessed it with me and experienced this thing. And it's only getting more excited. It's growing. And so, but UFOofGod.com.
Chris, thank you so much for joining us and sharing this amazing and wonderful story with us.
I appreciate you having me, Victor, and would come on again if you ever need me. Call me. I'd be glad to.
Absolutely. And thank you for joining us on Destination Unlimited. I'm Victor, the Voice Fuhrman. Have a wonderful week.